Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
We can handle the truth. What's so infuriating is to be told a lie and to be expected to accept it as truth.
Coming up, a lively conversation with Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Ayad Akhtar. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned.
Do you feel pride on September 11th?
I'm honest.
Oh, Amir, you don't really mean that.
And I was horrified by it, okay? Absolutely horrified.
Pride about what? About the towers coming down? About people getting killed?
That we are finally winning.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. You were just watching part of a scene from Disgraced, the Pulitzer Prize-winning play written by Ayad Akhtar. The play, which was also nominated for a Tony Award, starts out with lighthearted banter at a dinner party between friends. The dialogue begins to simmer, though, and then becomes explosive. Disgraced takes on hot-button issues surrounding 9/11 and Islam, but also reveals what Akhtar calls the secret tribal identities of us all. A cultural Muslim whose parents are from Pakistan, Akhtar doesn't shy away from challenging some of the precepts of his childhood faith in his other plays as well. Those include The Who and the What and The Invisible Hand. Akhtar's latest play is called Junk. He's also the author of a novel, American Dervish, and he both wrote and starred in the movie The War Within. I sat down with the prolific author at the 2017 Sun Valley Writers Conference. I started by asking him about his childhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So, looking back as an artist, what did growing up in Milwaukee afford you now as a creative?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know. I loved growing up in Milwaukee. It was a pretty homogenous community. We were the first Indo-Pak immigrants to move in to the suburb of Brookfield on the west side that I'm aware of. I didn't see anybody else. I was one of the only 2 or 3 kids who wasn't, Lutheran or Catholic and German or Polish or Swedish or Norwegian of stock in my school district for a long time. I didn't really feel left out, so I felt very welcome. And I was a Green Bay Packers fan, so really that's the only, requirement for citizenship.
I'm just wondering if coming from the middle of the country gave you a sensibility.
Well, it gave me a feel for America, but it was a bit paradoxical to be growing up as a Muslim kid, felt like he was a small town American, right? That's a very weird paradox. But, it is part of who I am. I think that a lot of the writers and artists, actually a lot of the people in general who grow up in the Midwest and then go to the coasts to get involved with any business, any major business, often retain a kind of wholesome, naive, open-heartedness at the core, which I think can serve them well if they can get past the sort of relentless shock of people's cynicism who've grown up in New York or LA. That feels very foreign to me.
Cynicism and...
Yeah, that kind of cynicism about people, about stuff. I just grew up in a place where, it wasn't like that.
So how did you self-identify as a child versus now in terms of your Islamic background?
I was much more identified with my Muslim heritage as a kid. I remember reading Jonathan Edwards' personal narrative, which is his account of sort of coming to Christ and these very early experiences he had as a kid of the sort of splendor and wonder of creation, sort of bringing this sweet sense of the Lord. This is how as a kid, I was very sensitized to life at that level. And the only thing that sort of spoke to my experience of life at that level was the Quran, or Star Wars, the Star Wars trilogy or the Quran, right? They were articulating something essential about the majesty of the world. And I was very, very preoccupied and very obsessed with religion and all of that sort of stuff, much to the confusion of my parents. And so I was just very, very taken by it, very threw myself into it, and
Kind of like the child in American Dervish.
yeah, of course, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I had this high school teacher who changed my life, and
Right.
she...
Miss Durfler?
Miss Durfler, yeah.
Yeah.
She, you know, she made me read a lot of things, and notably, she made me read The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. And it was a succession of reading, I think it was Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, The Plague by Camus, and then I read The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. And at the end of that sequence, I no longer had the same faith in whatever that childhood mythology was.
Because?
You know, it's the usual thinking person whose childhood faith crashes upon the shore of their intellectual development in their late adolescence and early adulthood. I think it's a common thing that happens. And I don't know, you just read certain things at certain times and they affect you, they make you think differently.
Right, and she had you read Dürrenmatt's The Tunnel,
Yeah.
which, for want of a better phrase, I'll use David Brooks's new phrase, he calls it an enunciation moment.
It was an enunciation
which is probably
moment.
the wrong phrase to use in this instance, but because of it being, you know, Catholic, not Islamic. But it's an enunciation moment
yes,
in the
absolutely.
sense that she had you read this story and it blew your mind.
It was the occasion, her analysis of that story, her analysis of the meaning of that story in class one day, single-handedly was the most important event of my life, because it made me understand there were vistas of reflection and experience in human life that had to do with a life of the mind. It was, you know, Edward Said talks about the metaphorical dimension of existence opening up for the first time. It was as if a whole new dimension of life was suddenly, I could see that asking questions could be thrilling and was the only thing I wanted to do from that point forward. It was about the inquiry. We're going to talk about Camus' Plague. What is this saying about life? What is this saying about the choices one makes in life?
So the asking of the questions
Yeah.
and the life of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
To me, when I read your work, it is all about the questions. And some of the questions you're asking and some of the themes you're pursuing are anathema to some people
Sure.
in your childhood faith group.
Sure, in my community,
They
absolutely.
push back. You're talking about violence against women.
Mm-hmm.
You're portraying conflict over, you know, people's understanding of verses in the Quran and
Yeah.
the life of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah.
But it's the questions, isn't it, for you, that are more important than, you know.
I had a wonderful realization when I was 31 or 32. Something that Ms. Durfler used to say a lot. She would say, you know, it's all about the questions, all about the questions. And yeah, you know, okay, at the time I would say, no, I want an answer. And then I remember I was watching a Green Bay Packers game, and I could feel the intense adhesive quality to my attention in the game because I didn't know who was going to win. And I remember experiencing, once it was clear who was going to win, a detachment from the experience. And I thought to myself, that's what she meant. Staying alive in the question. When you don't know what the outcome is, when you don't have the answer, your mind, your consciousness is still connected to that tension, is still engaged in that tension. So as an aesthetic principle, it really is how I approach my work. I want to keep the audience alive in that avid, attentive state.
And not ignoring some of the stereotypes we have of each other, some of the flashpoints in our society.
No, you know, I get this a lot. They're not. The stereotype is in the viewer. It's not in me. I am not. You know, if I write a character who has aspects of an anti-hero and experiences some trauma that he then lashes out and hits somebody, if he's a white character, that's just psychological depth. But if he's a Muslim character, it's a stereotype. That's somebody else's problem. That's somebody else's category. It's in their mind, it's in their eyes. I'm writing to truth as I see it. Truth of a character or a situation. you know, W.E.B. Du Bois talks about double consciousness, where minority cultures see themselves in their own experience through their own eyes, but also through the white majority's eyes. I'm not writing from a place of double consciousness. I'm not writing work so that the dominant majority can understand my people better. My experience is primary to me. My experience of faith is primary to me. It doesn't matter that somebody doesn't think Islam is a legitimate faith tradition. That's not my problem. That's their problem.
You were, correct me if I'm wrong, you were 31 when 9/11 happened?
Yeah, yes, I was about to turn 31.
So where were you? And
I was in New York.
you were in New York.
Yeah, I remember getting up, and the first thing I used to do, turn on New York 1 to check the time, the temperature, and there was the big picture on the screen of First Tower just kind of on fire. So I was like, oh, so it looks like something weird's going on. And then I heard, oh, plane, and so I guess some small plane. And as I was watching, another plane came and hit the other tower. So immediately, sort of, I think everybody understood at that moment that this was not an accident. And then, the day was what it was from that point forward. I do remember one of the impressions I remember of that day, which stayed with me, was a kind of buzzing in the streets as everyone was walking around the streets that felt very much like the same frenetic buzzing activity of ants when the colony has been destroyed. It's the same sort of scattered movement. And, it was a complicated and terrible day, and it was a day that sort of changed the fates of, Muslims in this country, obviously, probably forever.
So how did 9/11 inform you as a writer and what you wanted to write about? Did it affect you at all?
Sure, I think it did. I mean, I think it probably did in ways that I can't fully articulate. I mean, I do remember another striking thing to me that I felt on 9/11, which was an utter lack of surprise. And I couldn't understand how I could be so unsurprised by this. And then I understood, well, because in some sense I had been expecting something like this to happen most of my life. That the fault lines between the culture that I grew up in and the world that my folks came from, those fault lines were drawn quite clearly to me as a kid.
Now, your parents did not have the thought that you would be a writer.
Well, they wanted me to be, I think they hoped that I would be a doctor, but yeah, I think my dad ended up killing that dream when he made me give him a shot when I was 3 years old. And he instructed me on how to inject him with a syringe when I was 3, and I think I had some sort of a vasovagal event, like I kind of fainted, or, it was like, it wasn't going to happen. I was not going to be. I was too squeamish, like constitutionally. I still have a very difficult time with blood and whatnot. So I wasn't prepared to be a doctor.
Your mom wanted you to be a very specific doctor,
yes,
right?
Yes. My mom instructed me in anticipation of the first day of kindergarten that when the teacher says, what do you want to be when you grow up, you tell them that you want to be a neurologist. So the kindergarten teacher was very impressed. I didn't know what a neurologist was, but I said it.
But you, at some point, had, an epiphany, really, that included full-on voices of characters that you needed to be writing in a different way that was kind of closer to the bone, or?
I was avoiding my cultural heritage. I had been doing it since high school, and I had issues with my parents' culture, and I was partaking of that sort of paradigm of sort of remaking the self in America that we do, and I thought I could be whatever I wanted to be, and I didn't owe anybody anything. I didn't owe my heritage anything. I didn't owe, and I was going to go to Europe and be the person I wanted to be and come back to the United States and do the kind of work I wanted to do, and I think I just, this one's sources of artistic strength are not conscious. They're not chosen. Proust says beautifully, I think, that involuntary memory is the source of all art. You cannot get to involuntary memory through will. You cannot choose to be X and then find your way to involuntary memory. There's a degree of surrender that has to happen. And so life beat surrender into me. And maybe 9/11 was was maybe one of life's cudgels to beat at this resistance to surrender in me. But there were others, and I think in many ways the others were more important. The gradual process of maturation, of coming of age. There's something that starts to happen to folks in their mid-30s where they begin to understand it's not going to be different. This is life. There's not some ticket that's going to get you to some other version of life. And when that happens, there is a kind of an acceptance that begins to come, as it were, from the ground. So that started to happen too. And what I realized was I was avoiding my heritage. I was avoiding who I actually was in so many of the experiences of my childhood, which would have been the rightful subject for storytelling. And when I sort of started to recognize that, well, all of that material just came flooding. It just came pouring out of me.
It is really an amazing story.
Yeah,
I mean, you really heard the characters come to you for, say, your first novel, American Dervish.
Totally.
They came through you, and
I suddenly was writing pages and pages and pages of dialogue. And dialogue wasn't necessarily a thing that I was. It turns out something that I'm actually pretty good at.
Your dialogue is. I mean, when I read even your plays, and I'm not watching them, I actually can hear it. Your dialogue is fantastic.
And it just isn't, there's craft involved of many years of writing, I guess, but that was the organic source.
Is spooky to have that happen?
I think it speaks to something miraculous about the creative process that can never quite be understood.
And the female voices too come through?
The people who have affected me most in my life are the women who have shaped me. My mother's sisters, Miss Sturfler. I mean, the eternal wisdom of the feminine has been my sort of spiritual guide, I would say. So women's voices are not difficult for me to channel because I have spent so much time listening to them.
Tell me how people, do you consider yourself a secular Muslim, first of all?
Yeah, I think that's a term that I've used in the past. I rather would say I was a cultural Muslim, sort of following the lead a lot of my sort of thoughtful Jewish friends who call themselves cultural Jews, right? Yeah. I'd say I'm a cultural Muslim.
So when people who are more religious than you, who are Muslim,
or more identified with the identity marking of being Muslim, they may not be more religious in reality, but
what's their response? Because you are touching on hot button issues within the faith.
So their response is, why are you making us look bad? Which I don't think I am. I mean, it's funny because I remember audiences coming to the Who and the What at Lincoln Center. I mean, audiences that were laughing and crying for an hour and a half. Either they're laughing or they're crying from beat to beat, right? And I remember some friends of mine who come from the community who saw the play, and they were sort of apoplectic afterwards. I said, what are you so upset about? I said, do you see how everybody's laughing? They're laughing at us. They're laughing at us. Why are you making them laugh at us like this? I said, no. They're laughing with us. They're laughing because they're identified with us. No. I know what I felt. I felt them laughing at us. So this is a community that just is not used to being represented, doesn't have the experience, and doesn't understand that the us-them divide that they feel is something that can be transcended within the artistic space.
I laughed throughout the Who and the What, but there were also, again, very serious themes in there about abuse, about the veil, hijab. So going again to people's reactions, and I imagine it's not just from the Muslim community, but also from, people who consider themselves liberal.
Yeah, the most vociferous attacks come from non-Muslim liberals who believe that they are spokesmen for victims. That their job is to stand up for victims in our society, whether that's the homeless or the besieged Muslim community, they have no understanding, for the most part, of the nuances. And they make a lot of assumptions. And incidentally, Disgraced contains one of those characters. Her name is Emily. She's
Right.
married to Amir.
Right.
So that whole nexus, that dilemma, is actually the subject of Disgraced.
Yeah.
And it's fine. I mean, I think my attitude is, I'm going to do the work I got to do, and people can react how they're going to react, and that's their prerogative, and that's what it's all about.
When you look at your characters, or when you watch your characters, it just goes to show you really don't know who people are in many instances until they're pushed right to the brink, to that moment, and when all of a sudden maybe their inner self or their true self exposes itself.
Kierkegaard has a wonderful saying. He says that the circumstances of your life will tighten upon you like screws on a rack and will force what is truly inside you to come out. That life is the process of the tightening of the rack. And I think it's great dramatic, that's just great guidance for drama. And another thing that I like to say a lot when I talk to young people who ask me questions about writing is, Aristotle defines character. We know who a person is by what they do, not by the traits that we think they have. They come from here, they are a woman, they are a man, they are IQ this, that doesn't tell us who a person really is. What tells us who a person really is what they actually do. So revealing that moment of doing that is meaningful, that's to me the essence of drama.
As I recall, you have maybe 7 works.
Well, so this inspiration, that I was talking about, where all this flood of creativity, 4 works came out of that, American Dervish and these 3 plays. And then there were 3 more ideas that I wasn't able to get to because of the wonderful things that started to happen to me, like winning the Pulitzer and all of that, that sort of got me off, sort of veered off to the right. I have, to my investment banking friends, I say my dilemma is that I'm like a company that was valued for innovation that got caught in a cycle of exploiting existing product. How do I get back to innovation? They say, it's very easy. We can solve that problem in a heartbeat. You say, how? Expand the labor force. It's like, that's exactly what I can't do.
Yeah. There's only one of you. Yet 2012 was a huge year for you.
Right. And I'm still, and it was 2012, 2013. And for me, I'm so grateful and I feel very blessed, but by the same token, there's a huge challenge. I'm still 5 years after them. It's 4.5 years after that, and I'm still dealing with the ramifications of it. The only big thing that I've been able to create or write is this new play called Junk. It's about debt financing. And so what I do is I take a leverage buyout deal that turns into a hostile takeover, and I put the entire deal on stage. Lawyers, accountants, arbitrage guys, investment bankers, management, legal for management. And I show, over the course of 68 scenes of 30 characters and 3 acts, the transformation, the philosophical transformation of moving from a world where we make things to a world where money makes money. Things make money versus money making money. And to me, at root, most of the problems that we're dealing with have to do with this abstraction.
What's driving you?
What do you mean?
What's driving you? Where's
William,
this passion coming from to say now make a statement or not explicate this financial side? Where's this energy coming from and what's driving you?
I don't know. It's a good question. William Gaddis, I think, a great American novelist, once said, when a writer runs out of rage, a writer runs out of things to say. What is that anger? That anger is about injustice. And I think any writer worth their salt is fundamentally chafes at the lies. It's that we can handle the truth. What's so infuriating is to be told a lie and to be expected to accept it as truth. Whether we are a young James Joyce in Portrait of an Artist in the 4th chapter listening to that ridiculous sermon about going to hell and understanding that it is a lie intended to keep him afraid, or whether it's listening to the political discourse these days and understanding that everybody is lying about everything and that somehow our lives are being fundamentally altered by a bunch of people who can't even keep their lies straight. It's outrage. And I think that outrage is human. And I think it's the job of the artist to, give it form, give it shape, give it voice. One of the things that has hurt us, I think, as a culture and as a civilization is the advent of a way of thinking over the past 50 years that has delegitimized or decentralized knowledge in any significant way. And that knowledge is somehow subjective, right? And this is what allows the terminus of fake news, in which something which is evidently true is offered as alternative fact, right? So language has ceased to have meaning. Language is slipping away from meaning. And that points to a real crisis within the political consciousness of a nation, and it's not the first time it's ever happened in the history of the world, but it points to a real inflection point.
What's it like to win a Pulitzer? Never having done that myself.
I mean, it's amazing. It's unexpected, and I always say I didn't do anything to win a Pulitzer. It's not like I ran a race and I beat some guy, or I was playing golf and I shot, I shot a 66 on Augusta National. I just doing my thing. I'm just doing my thing, and then somebody calls you one day and says you won this thing. And so I can't really take responsibility for it, but it's changed my life. I wouldn't be sitting here with you if that hadn't happened. You wouldn't be tolerating my, my pronouncements. I'm grateful for it, and I think the big danger is to think that it somehow makes you a better writer. It doesn't. I've still got to keep working on myself, and it happened to me late enough in life that I didn't take it seriously enough to think that it was going to make me a better writer.
But it might have convinced your parents that finally maybe you shouldn't be a doctor. This writing gig is okay.
Yes. How did I put it last night? I said, prizes and articles in the paper may not make you a better writer, but they do make your mother feel better about you now having become a neurologist.
Well, I know I'm going to look forward to seeing more of your work. I've read all your plays and your novel and watched your film. I hope to see them in person someday, and really look forward to following you as an artist. So
thank you for riding the choppy waves of my inner life through this interview.
Not a problem. You've been listening to playwright, screenwriter, novelist, and actor Ayad Akhtar. Our conversation took place at the 2017 Sun Valley Writers Conference. To learn more, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Check out our website, become a friend on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.